The latest Odyssey dev diary reveals a load of new footage on the update. This one is focused entirely on combat and goes into some details on all of this. In total, there's around about 2 minutes of new footage, which you can see playing in the background right here. So then, we can take a closer look at this, see what it's all about, and also talk about what Frontier have highlighted in their new video. Now, Frontier said that the main focus for Odyssey was to bring the nature of combat in space down to the ground level. That is how Frontier described the combat itself. They also mentioned the combat triangle. Now in space, the combat triangle probably would mean the constant need to balance pips between engines, weapons and shields. We know that on foot, players have access to suit power, shields and jetpacks or jump packs. It seems very likely that players will need to balance the use of these against each other. Now, Frontier also suggests that the triangle of combat is the balance of combat between ships, SRVs and on-foot players. This would be what I would consider to be the sphere of combat that Frontier titled the dev diary with, or to use another more commonly used description, this would be called combined arms. Unfortunately, the new dev diary doesn't actually show combined arms in action, instead opting to focus on first-person combat. Combined arms have previously been mentioned by Frontier in their interview with Polygon. If there's combat, Hughes also said it can be of the combined arms variety. That means that players on foot can be supported by other players inside wheeled SRVs and even starships, all working toward the same goal. Hopefully then we'll see more on combined arms in the not too distant future. Combat can span from the surface all the way into space. It's a nice hint of where things are going and something specifically mentioned in the dev diary. Meanwhile, the dev diary did show a variety of different locations for combat. They also briefly touched on how Odyssey will open up some tactical options for gameplay. An apparent example of this is players cutting into an emergency access panel. My guess would be to run interference with a settlement. They also spent a good portion of the diary discussing audio, which I think is entirely fair as the Elite Dangerous Sound team does a tremendous job. A lot of work looks to have gone into capturing every element of the weapons sound design, for example. Audio then, like any other good game, has been designed to convey to the player what is going on, not just within the environment, but also within the gameplay. The player's breath is a good example of this. That would be combat stress. The big part of heading into combat is going to be a preparation. Here, players will need to decide what suit and what weapons they will actually take and have to generally think about their overall loadout. This is important because things cannot be changed on the fly and a character has a limited carrying capacity and weapon slots. The type of loadout a player takes into combat will depend upon the environment and the situation they will be faced with. Regarding weapons, there are 3 main forms of these: plasma weapons, laser and kinetic. These are all the different types that will be available, and each of these will be specific to certain manufacturers. Some of the weapons we can see on the screen right here, and Frontier have gone into a lot of details on the modelling. So clearly, different weapons will have a different impact upon things. They will of course affect the type and amount of damage you deal, but they will also affect your manoeuvrability. If you are carrying a heavy weapon, for example, you certainly won't be moving around very fast. So that pretty much covers everything the video discussed. In some ways it was pretty light on details, as Frontier opted to go with a descriptive style where they commented on the experience of combat and what it feels like. In short, they were really discussing the immersion of the title, so things like the audio and the strategic choice of taking loadouts and having ships and people in the same environment. However, there was unfortunately no details at all on how the game actually plays. The good news is that the video did contain a bunch of new footage that gives us some insight into how combat actually plays out. Now, I don't want to go into too much depth on any of these because it's basically impossible to talk about the gameplay itself. After all, there's very little context here, so aside from some characters shooting at each other, we can't really see how the gameplay functions. For example, does cover play an important part in the combat? Or is it more about equipment such as shields and armour and standing there and taking the damage until, someone dies? Unfortunately, there's just not enough information nor enough footage within the video to make any type of determination on that. So for now, I'm kind of going to give it a pass on going into too deep of an analysis on the combat aspects of the game, at least based on what we've seen so far. So for now, it's pretty much impossible to comment on what the gameplay may or may not be like. That said, we do have a bit of an idea of what it will actually look like. So I have a feeling in terms of visuals and audio that combat in Odyssey is certainly going to be a bit of a treat. I'm glad that Frontier are going with the option of limiting how many weapons can be carried in one go, as this pushes people into playing roles in the battlefield. I also feel that the building interiors look suitably menacing and convey a lot of atmosphere. So there we have it then, all the latest details available on combat in Odyssey. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.